All right, it's 7 p.m. and the official program will be starting shortly. I would like to warmly welcome everyone to tonight's commemoration, especially to staff and members of the Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centers, to our honored guest speakers and partners in tonight's event, as well as the Holocaust survivors and their families who have joined us for this commemoration. Just a few reminders before we begin. Please remain on mute throughout this evening's event. Please use the chat for any questions or comments, and we will do our best to answer these during the presentation or perhaps via email afterwards. We are recording this event and will make the recording available to everybody. Tonight's event is hosted by the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. The foundation acts as an association of the three independent Holocaust and Genocide centers in South Africa, namely the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center, the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center, and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. We are very grateful to our partners for tonight's commemoration, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation Southern Africa and the United Nations Information Center, Pretoria. I will now stop the screen share. I will now hand over to Tali Nates, the director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and the chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation.
Good evening, dear survivors from South Africa, from around the world joining us, Ambassador Martin Schaefer, members of the Diplomatic Corps, UNIC Director, partners, dignitaries, guest speaker, Professor Boum, South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation directors from the Durban and Cape Town centers, former directors of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation and the centers, board members, team members, supporters, honored guests from South Africa, Africa, and the world. We welcome you to tonight's commemoration. My name is Tali Nates, and I am the chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, an association of three independent centers in South Africa, the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center, the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center, and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, where I also serve as the director. Tonight, I will be your program directors, and it will be my honor to present to you our program tonight. Speaking on behalf of the three centers and our teams, we would like to welcome you all to the 2021 International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, the 76th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz complex of camps. We are privileged to continue our long partnership with the United Nations in commemorating this day with the generous support of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. The 27th of January 1945 was the day that, as I said, the Auschwitz complex of camps was liberated by the Soviet army. And as such, the symbolic day was chosen as the day when the world remembers the horrors of the Holocaust or the Shoah. After the war, Auschwitz became the symbol in a way of the Holocaust. When you say Auschwitz, you think of the Holocaust. However, first of all, when Auschwitz was liberated, there were only about 7,500 very sick survivors there. So they liberated an empty camp. For many of the survivors that were taken on death marches, liberation only arrived months later in April and May of 1945. Also, Auschwitz is only one of almost 43,000 other concentration and killing centers, ghettos, and killing sites that are marked by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museums in the past years. Jews were murdered everywhere. They were murdered in ghettos, they were murdered in camps. They were shot by the Einsatzgruppen in thousands of killing sites. They were gassed in gas vans in places like Chelmno or Jasenovac. Gas vans were used in places like Mali Trostenets in Belarus that very few know about. Gas chambers murdered Jews and others in Sobibor, Belzec, Majdanek, Chelmno, Treblinka, yes, and indeed also in Auschwitz. So we need to remember all those names. We need to remember all those sites. And for me personally, for example, as I am a daughter of survivors and my family was murdered in Belzec, where 500,000 were murdered in a period of 10 months, I would like us to also remember Belzec. That is where my grandmother and aunts were murdered. And this is a camp that only one person survived, Rudolf Rader, that told the history of the camp after the war. So we should remember more than Auschwitz today. In honor of this day, the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, with the generous sponsorship of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, is proud to launch today the first volume of our digital publication, Portraits of Survival. This publication showcases stories, short stories, portraits of survivors who settled in South Africa. It has different chapters and different stories. It has historical context. And the stories are about survivors that settled in Cape Town, in Durban, in Johannesburg, and in many smaller towns and places. You will be able to get this publication for free. Download it from any of the 3 Holocaust and Genocide Centers websites, and you will be able to download it easily in PDF or other ways. It was an honor to work on this publication for the last year. The collection of short portraits will serve as an educational resource for learners and educators. The stories highlight not only the diversity of experiences of genocide, but also many important lessons and insights into the consequences of discrimination, prejudice, and othering, as well as the power of activism and speaking up. The book includes a foreword by our patron and CEO of the USC Shoah Foundation, Dr. Stephen Smith, and please make sure to visit our website to download this extraordinary publication. We will start our special online commemoration today, listening to 3 Holocaust survivors telling us about their experiences in Auschwitz and in Majdanek killing centers. The film is part of the permanent exhibition at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and the survivors are Ella Blumenthal, Miriam Lichterman, and Pinchas Guta.
I remember quite clearly, I said to myself, well, you know, now we're going to be guests. Because, you know, all the other people were going to Treblinka. We knew about Treblinka. We knew about the death camps. We knew about the, you know, the gas chambers. I mean, it wasn't a secret. Some people wouldn't believe it, but you knew it. Even if you didn't want to believe it, you knew that it was happening.
When the train stopped, we were in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Well, there was an orchestra playing, made up of prisoners. In front of them, the commandants of the camps were standing, watching us coming into the camp. And we were ordered to go through a selection. There were Germans standing, we women. And one of them in front was pointing with a stick in his hand, right to life, left to death. Women with mothers with children were sent away, and older women. Then the men were sent away. And my father just looked back at me when he was ordered to move with the others, and he was hit over the head, bent down, and this is how I saw him. And that's how I saw him the last time. I've never seen my father again.
When we got to Majdanek, they divided the men from the women and the children from the adults. So they took my sister, and I kind of like was left with the grown-ups, and my mother was screaming, and she ran towards my sister. And my sister grabbed her, and they were kind of holding each other. I remember somebody lifting and kind of like pushing my mother into that, and they started walking, and within 5 minutes they disappeared. I remember my mother's and my father's face very clearly. I can't remember my sister's face. And I remember the last few minutes of her life in Majdanek. But again, I can't see her face. I can only see her running, and I can see her hair, and I can see her grasping my mother. But I can't see her face.
Going out to work outside the camp one morning, we saw trucks lined up on the railway line. We saw little faces peeping out. And we felt completely helpless. We knew what will happen in a few minutes' time when the camp will empty, when we will be all away, then they would be chased out to the gas chambers. And we just wondered why the world was keeping quiet. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't even save ourselves. And we were helpless.
We will start our speeches with the director of the United Nations Information Center in Pretoria. Mr. Masimba Tafiri-Nyika will deliver his address and will also share a message from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Thank you very much, Tali, for the introduction. It's always a pleasure to see you again, even though this time we are seeing each other virtually. Survivors and families of the Holocaust, His Excellency Dr. Martin Schäfer, the German ambassador to South Africa, Professor Aomar Boum of the University of California in Los Angeles. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is indeed a privilege for me to join you this evening on this solemn occasion as we mark this year's International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. Allow me to pay special tribute to the survivors and families of the Holocaust who continue to inspire us with their resilience, courage, and strength to fight for a better world and a better future. This year's theme, which is entitled Facing the Aftermath, Recovery and Reconstitution After the Holocaust, examines the contribution of the responses to the victims of the Holocaust and of the survivors in addressing the needs of the contemporary world and to the historical record of the Holocaust. It is a reminder of the crisis the world is facing today, that is the vicious and silent disease, COVID-19. We have learned, and we still continue to learn many lessons from the pandemic. One of the most important lessons we can learn from the aftermath of the Holocaust is the need to build back better in the aftermath of COVID-19. Our theme today focuses on the measures that were taken immediately following the Holocaust, which was to begin the process of recovery and reconstitution of individuals, communities, and systems of justice. These are precisely some of the pandemic-induced challenges confronting the world today that include the rising death toll among us, the damage that has been unleashed on the world economy, rising unemployment, and the loss of income and livelihoods by millions of people the world over as a result of COVID-19 lockdowns. We have witnessed how lockdowns have affected our mental health. We have watched with apprehension what started as dry statistics of the people who were dying from COVID-19. But the reality of the situation is that the pandemic is now coming nearer home, as those statistics now include our loved ones, our dear friends, and our colleagues. As we remember the millions who perished in the Holocaust, we must honor them by once again emulating what the world might have, that is, nations helping each other to build back better. Just as assistance was provided to recover and reconstitute communities after the Holocaust, today we must strengthen global solidarity to build back better after the pandemic. More than 1 million people have perished from COVID-19, and almost 1 million more have contracted the virus. We are still in the eye of the storm of a silent killer that is robbing us of our loved ones without discrimination. But one thing is certain, this too shall pass. This is precisely why it's critical to learn from the lessons of the aftermath of the Holocaust. A positive case of COVID-19 in any country is a threat to the lives of all citizens anywhere. We need to build back better by investing more in our health systems. We need to build back better by shunning anti-Semitism, extremism, and discrimination. We need to build back better by bringing back people's livelihoods. And above all else, we need to build back better by leaving no one behind. I thank you.
Today, we honor the memory of the 6 million Jews and millions of others who were systematically murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazis and their collaborators. This year's anniversary takes place under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has revealed long-standing fractures and injustices in our societies and contributed to a resurgence in anti-Semitism and xenophobia. The Holocaust was the culmination of 2 millennia of discrimination, attacks, expulsions, and periodic mass killings of Jews. It should have ended anti-Semitism for good, but it did not. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, remains alive and well. Today, white supremacists and neo-Nazis are resurgent, organizing and recruiting across borders, intensifying their efforts to deny, distort, and rewrite history, including the Holocaust. The COVID-19 pandemic has given them new opportunities to target minorities based on religion, race, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, disability, and immigration status. We must make urgent joint efforts to stop them. As we consider the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must address the fragilities and gaps exposed by the pandemic and strengthen our mutual bonds based on our common humanity. This year must be a year of healing. Healing from the pandemic, and healing our broken societies in which hatred has all too easily taken root. As we remember those who died in the Holocaust and honor the survivors, our best tribute is the creation of a world of equality, justice, and dignity for all.
Thank you very much to the message from the United Nations and for our annual partnership. We appreciate it very much. Now we will hear Lexi Davis, a grade 12 and head of the Judaica Committee at King David High School, Linksfield, recite the poem, The Last Lullaby. Written by Yanka Abrami, this poem was dedicated to Yanka's sister, Fela, and her daughter, Ruti. Both were murdered in Auschwitz.
She saw the chimneys belching smoke and the black smoke above, covering the world with a blanket of doom, obscuring the picture of God. She held onto her mother, the terror in her dark eyes, distorting her 4-year-old face with ancient wisdom. I don't want to go in there for a shower, she cried. I don't want to go. Shush, my pet, don't cry. The water won't be cold and I'll hold you tight. The woman soothed her child as they walked into the concrete cage. She couldn't see the chimneys anymore, nor the dark clouds above, nor did she hear the moans and the Shema Yisrael of others. As she snuggled close to her mother, all she heard was the loving voice. Whisper, the last lullaby of Auschwitz. Shush, my darling, shush.
It is my honor to invite His Excellency, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany in South Africa, Dr. Martin Schäfer, to address us. Martin, if you can unmute yourself.
There we are. I think you can. I think I'm audible now. Am I not, Tali?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Honored survivors of the Holocaust, your children, your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, dear Tali, and all your colleagues and your staff at the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation and the 3 Genocide and Holocaust Centers, our hosts tonight. Members of the Jewish community in South Africa and in Africa at large who are with us, rabbis, members of the Jewish Board of Deputies, and all other Jewish organizations and individuals. Colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps and the United Nations, South Africans, Israeli, and all other participants in this solemn celebration, my German compatriots, ladies and gentlemen. We have come together tonight to be together. We have come together to commemorate together. I believe, I am convinced it is important on a night like this to be together, albeit only on a virtual platforms. It is important to be together as victims, as the children and the grandchildren of the perpetrators, and as a broad and convinced community of all those who will always remember and never forget. I have tried, as so many others, so many times to understand. I have tried so many times to get answers to my burning questions. How was that possible? How did we Germans, a people proud of our cultural heritage, of our humanity, and of our civilization, could become murderers? And how did that feel like? As a perpetrator, and more importantly, as a victim. I must admit, I failed. I don't have these answers. But maybe, just maybe, this pandemic that we're all going through together offers me and some others just a little glimpse of what it might have meant. I, in my entire life, have never been persecuted. I have never been oppressed. I have never been discriminated against. So I can try to understand with my senses what it meant. But it is difficult to understand what it means to be a victim of the Holocaust, of persecution, of oppression, with your heart and with your soul. The anxiety, the fear, the horror of being hit innocently and randomly and die. Isn't that something that we can feel in this terrible pandemic too? Not that that would be in any way comparable to the experiences of those who perished and those who survived. But still, a little bit I can understand what it feels to feel the fear that your children, your partner, your friends are gone from one day to the other, only to come never back. Not that in any way this would mean that I could pretend to even come close to what the Holocaust meant to Veronica Phillips, to all the other Holocaust survivors, and to all those that perished. But maybe, just maybe, for this one and only time in my happy life, I do just get this little glimpse of the fears, of the anxieties that gripped Jews and others after 1993 in Germany. Veronica and all the other Holocaust survivors that can be with us tonight, we will never know how it feels like, what it felt like, what you went through. But we are lucky to be able to hear your stories, to hear them from you, and to share the memories with you. And another question haunts me, and I don't have a response for it either. Is it possible that mankind has learned nothing from history, from the Holocaust? Post-truth, alternative facts, extremist echo chambers, racism, anti-Semitism are on the rise. No doubt about that. And with it, new and old fascist thinking, despising democracy, other religions, and minorities. In fact, I feel that parts of the world, just in those weeks that we have gone through, resemble my hometown, Berlin, in 1929. When the brown masses were on the streets, when Goebbels and Hitler tried to take power in Berlin, when the politics descended into the abyss, and nobody knew yet what still was to come, and that it was just the beginning of something worse. I would like you all, and I would wish you all, to join in a solemn vow with me tonight, to forever commemorate and honor the victims of the Holocaust, those that perished and those that survived, and to earn the respect of the Holocaust survivors with our thinking and more so with our deeds. We will not let it happen that fascism, that hatred, that racism and anti-Semitism invade our hearts and our minds, and our societies and our nations. We are willing to fight. We are willing to fight. And I would like, as a representative of the nation of the perpetrators of the Holocaust, make a promise to all of you that have come together in this virtual solemn commemoration of the day of the liberation of Auschwitz 76 years ago to this day, that we will ever be conscious of our guilt and of our responsibility, and that we have learned our lesson in history, that we will do everything we can for the horror of the Shoah never to be repeated, and that we remember and that we will never forget. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for your important and powerful words and for your friendship to the 3 Holocaust and Genocide centers in South Africa, and especially to the survivors community in Johannesburg. We truly appreciate your contribution. In our annual commemorations, we call on survivors to light memorial candles while we reflect on the past and its lessons. With the restrictions and the pandemic, we invite you to take part in a recorded candle lighting ceremony. It will start with 99-year-old survivor of Auschwitz, Ella Blumenthal, lighting a candle. And then it will be followed by photos of survivors from Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg, lighting candles in past years' ceremonies. Some of the survivors, sadly, passed away since. We miss them all.
I, Ella Blumenthal, nee Frank, light this candle in memory of the 6 million victims of the Holocaust.
I was born in 1921 in Warsaw, Poland. I survived the Warsaw Ghetto, was deported to Majdanek, and from there, my niece Roma and I were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And finally, Bergen-Belsen, where we were liberated. We were the only members of our large family who survived the Holocaust. I am 99 years old, live in Cape Town, and have 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren.
In 2020, and this year in January 2021, the following Holocaust survivors sadly passed away. We will always remember them. Mordechai Pelov, Judith Mendenberg, and Asya Lieberman, survivors from Lithuania. Masha Scheinberg and Jack Putterman, survivors from Poland. Esther Wasserchuk and Lottie Stern, survivors from Germany. Henry Mintz from France, and Ellen Guild, survivor from Greece. For a commemoration on the African continent, it is fitting that our keynote speaker tonight is a prolific researcher and writer about the Holocaust in Africa, something most of us know very little about. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Professor Aomar Boum. Aomar Boum is an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Los Angeles, and faculty fellow at the Université Internationale de Rabat in Morocco. He is interested in the place of religious minorities, such as Jews, Baha'i, Shias, and Christians in post-independence nation states. He is the author of Memories of Absence, How Muslims Remember Jews in Morocco, co-editor of the Holocaust in North Africa, with Sarah A. Stein. He is currently working with Sarah A. Stein on a source book on North Africa during World War II, a monograph on Morocco and the Holocaust. The story of Muhammad V saving Jews during World War II, 1940-2020, to be co-authored with Daniel Schroeter in graphic comic titled Undesirables, a Refugee Journey Through Europe and North Africa with artist Najib Berber. It is my honor to also work with Professor Boum on an upcoming consortium on Africa and the Holocaust that will happen in June of this year. Please, during your his talk, post any questions you have in the chat. And as this is a commemoration, we will try and either answer your questions in the chat or via email after the event. Professor Boum, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tali. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be. It is really humbling to be a part of today's event. And my thoughts go to, in this solemn moment and this solemn event, to honor the dead of the Nazi genocide. What I will try to talk about today is another chapter of the war period, but it's a chapter that takes place in North Africa. It's a chapter that, when I say North Africa, I'm saying here, I'm talking about Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, that were under three regimes of colonialism. You have the French colonial presence, the Spanish colonial presence in northern Morocco, French in Tunisia, Algeria and Morocco, and Italy in Libya. So as the war is taking place, there were three colonial presence in the region. But what I'm going to focus here, I'm going to focus on the camps, a different type of camps. So as we know, the icon, the nefarious icon of the Holocaust is Auschwitz-Birkenau. But there are other types of camps that experienced the presence of European Jews and non-Jews, as well as Muslims and Christians. I'm starting here with this picture of a famous individual, the granddaughter of Sigmund Freud, who, after she fled Vienna with her mother, they spent some time in France, and from there they ended up in Casablanca. And that's, you would imagine that the Casablanca as a movie, and the refugees basically coming, seeking refuge from Europe, and then trying to get a permit to go to Lisbon, and from Lisbon to either the Americas or other parts of the world where they sought safety. So this is a story. This is one of the story, but it's a story. It's a story that of survivors. It's a story of the people who did not end up in those camps, although they spent a few moments in an internment camp outside of Casablanca. But then later on, they were adopted by a Jewish family, a Sephardic Jewish family in Casablanca, and Sophie and her mother actually were able to establish one of the first schools of the deaf in Casablanca before they went to the United States. So I'm gonna, of course, some of this material comes from this book that I co-edited with my colleague at UCLA, Sarah Stein, and in it we talk about different aspects of the Holocaust and the mostly Vichy as well as the Nazi policies in the region. Now, when we talk about the network of camps
in Europe, and particularly in France, in the southern part of France, many of these refugees who were the results of the end, who came to France mostly through after the end of the Spanish Civil War, they ended up in camps like Le Vernet in the southern part here, and in Gours, and some of them would later on be moved to North Africa. This is in addition to the people who were who did not end up in these camps, but fled directly to North Africa. So how do we make sense of this? I'm going to start by, first of all, talking about a project. This is the camps were linked to a colonial project that goes back to the 19th century, where France wanted to establish a network of railroad systems that connected the Mediterranean, the Mediterranean, as you can see in the map, the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa, and from here they would connect it to Senegal. And that was a project that were really thought of in the 19th century. By 1940, after the Vichy establishment in France, Pétain decided to relaunch this project. And one way to do it is so the governor of the Vichy governors in Algeria, as well as in Morocco, and in Morocco, they began basically putting together different camps close to cities. So all of these cities, all these dots that you see here are actually dots where some of these camps were located, and they were connected mostly to the building of this rail network. This rail network, in addition to Jews who fled, who were captured in cities like Algiers or Oran or Tunis or Casablanca and so on and so forth, they were added to them. They added to them survivors or people who fled after the end of the Spanish Civil War, and members of the International Brigade that included Spanish civilians and other people from Latin America and other parts of the world, including Americans. So how do we know about these camps? What do we know about these camps? Unlike a lot of the stories we know about camps in mainland Europe, not a lot of information survived what happened in this camp. But we do have some information coming mostly from authors and individuals who were able to draw or to write their notes. One of the most important sources that I rely on that I have relied on in my work is a journal and writings by Max Aub. Max Aub was a Jew from a French as well as a German descent. He served during the Spanish Civil War against Franco, and then ended up in the camp of Jelfa in modern Algeria today. There is another memoir that was written by a Muslim in a different camp where you had Jews and Muslims and Spanish Republicans in Algeria. That's called and this memoir was about a camp called the Jenin Bourrizq, which was mostly for political prisoners, because here in this system of camps that was established in Northern Africa, you have camps, what we call penal camps, you have constant retention camps, and you have labor camps, forced labor camps. So this was a penal camp that included even not only the Max Aub, but also in Bernard Lecache, who was the head of the LICA, the International League Against Anti-Semitism and Racism, spent a few months in this camp. Another source of information comes from, and most of this information actually that I use is either from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC or Yad Vashem, as well as other other archives in North Africa, mostly the Moroccan archives. So after the American landing and Operation Torch in Casablanca, you have now the American army would become involved in the management, or at least in the freeing of some of these prisoners and these internees. And some of the sources we are getting is from, for instance, from this file called by Donald Kostner. And Donald Kostner, what he does basically, he was able to collect some of the drawings from members, from people who were interned in these camps. These are actually drawings that remind us of some of the drawings in camps of Gurs, for instance, in France, where you have a lot of people survived their times in these camps by playing music and by drawing. So art and poetry and music were part of this. So you see some element in some of these camps in North Africa, but not a lot. So these are some of the few documents we have today. And you can see and then it gives you also an idea about not only the internees like Ernest Tufel, but also what they had in mind. What are their thoughts? It gives you also some ideas about their life prior to being picked up by members of the French Vichy army, then their lives in the camp, and how they see the future. The second part of the material that we use to reconstruct the lives in these camps is the documentation coming from the American Service Committee and the Quakers. The Quakers, in relationship, in working with other institutions like the American Joint Distribution Committee and Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, they were really fundamental in not only collecting information about these refugees, Jewish European refugees who ended up in these camps, or other also non-Jews. So you can see we have letters that really, through which we're now reconstructing. We're at the beginning of reconstructing these stories. Letters that were sent between the American, for instance, Leslie Heath, after the American landing in Casablanca, Leslie Heath would become one of the key figures in this process of the naming and recording the stories of these and helping them getting out of these camps. I also want to stress a point here that when these camps, when the American landed and the Allies landed in North Africa, some of these camps remained open until the 1943, 1944. So it really took a lot of pressure from the American Jewish communities to put pressure on the American government to close these camps, because the Americans wanted to keep the system as it is until basically the defeat of the Nazis. And the result of this, a lot of these internees spent some time even after the American landing in the region. Just another document here. Okay, and one of the most important figure in basically freeing these or at least helping these refugees and internees is Ellen Ben Attar, who was who collaborated with the American French Service Committee. This Ellen Ben Attar, there's actually a book that's gonna come about her. It's really an important book that I would encourage people who are interested in this story to buy it. It should be coming at the end of this year it's written by Susan Miller, and it will be published by Stanford University Press. And Ellen Ben Attar was a lawyer from Tangier, but after the implementation of the Vichy anti-Jewish laws, in the first laws in 1940, and then later on in 1941, a lot of Jews were prohibited from practicing law, being lawyers, or some of the property was taken from Jews. You have a restriction about the number of Jews who went to school. So all of these laws were started in France, in mainland France, but they were also implemented in the colonies, in the French colonies. Another thing that Algerian Jews actually lost their citizenship, which was introduced by the Crimea Decree in 1870. They lost it right at the beginning of these laws. So all of these things highlight the role of Ellen Ben Attar in basically helping some of these refugees and Jewish internees either get out of these different types of camps, or getting letters to them, getting money to them, and then later on recording all their names. So most of the records we have today is included in the file of Ellen Ben Attar, which is both in which is you can find at Yad Vashem today, as well as copies in the United Holocaust Memorial Museum. So I want to move to just give you an idea before I end. I want to give you an idea about life in one particular camp, in the camp of Jalfa. So here, this is a map that also again highlights the complexity of this place. So you have Morocco was under French colonialism, but also the northern part of Morocco and the southern part were under the Spanish colonial presence. You have Algeria was part of France, was a department in France. So you have representatives in Algeria, actually, who have seats in the Senate in mainland France. So it has a special status. Tunisia was a protectorate like Morocco under French, and Libya was under Italian colony. So, and then you have also another set of camps that were part of West Africa. So you have in Mali, in Senegal, and in Guinea. You have also other camps that were connected to indirectly to some of all these networks of camps in North Africa, which really highlight the complexity and the network, because they are part of this project to set up these networks of railroads for economic and as well as for military reasons. Because at some point during the war, the Nazi authorities began encouraging Vichy authorities to accelerate the building of the railroads in order to move the troops internally so that they would not be affected by the maritime, by the boats, military boats, either in the Atlantic or the Mediterranean. So you can see, this is I'm giving you here an example of this. This map shows a few of these camps. The camps that I've written a lot about is the camp of Jalfa, but I also have written, if you're interested in these topics, you have at least I've written close to 30 entries or more than 30 entries for the Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos that is published by the United Holocaust Memorial Museum. It gives you an idea about these camps that are situated in the majority of North African countries. So one of the things that I wanted to stress here is that the movement of these camps relied on movements of people. So as I mentioned already, I already mentioned that you have a movement of these refugees coming from France because of the need of labor. So some of them, instead of being moved to mainland Europe, they were actually moved to North Africa to work in these camps. And then the way the camp started, it started what you call these Arab tents. So, and then later on you have the building of barracks. Many of these camps were set up in the desert. And it's really, when we try to think about the connections and the similarities and differences between these camps in Africa and the camps in Europe, when I read, for instance, this camp of Jalfa, I read it against the camp of Gurs, which is in a forest. So, but there's nowhere to go, and even the natural conditions would not allow even the people even sometimes to flee. And because it's in the middle of the desert, that's why sometimes you don't see even, you see no walls or no barbs around it. But some later on did, because as the war moved, the conditions of work became even harsher, and that pushed a lot of people to try to flee these camps. There was an internal economy within these camps. This is an economy that built so the guards and the commanders of the camps, sometimes they also try to use the natural resources, for instance, the Halfa here, to build and make things, because a lot of these internees were had jobs before, so they knew carpenters and so on and so forth. So they were making things, and these things were sold in the local economies, and the people were benefiting from it. So there is that's what we call the internal, which is very, in some ways, similar to some of the camps that we have in Europe. This is a map of the camp in Jelfa again. It shows how it moved from tents to a very complex camp that, especially as the building of the railroad system improved. Dogs one of the most powerful documents we have about these camps is the poetry. And Max Ob, who is a poet, writes about dogs, writes about crows, writes about scorpions, writes about all of these things. So nature, but at the same time, how nature is used in order to subdue these internees, and also make sure that they follow the rules of the commanders. And even though at certain moments you have rebellions within some of these camps. There is also the use of the local population, especially you have the Gooms, which is part of an auxiliary force that was part of the French army going back to World War I. It's called the Gooms. Then you have also a French one, an Algerian one called the Spahis. But there is also the French Vichy colonial authorities used also Senegalese tirailleurs. So you have all of these as a way to guard these camps, or sometimes even to punish the internees. These are images from the U.S. Holocaust Museum that gives you some of the ideas of how this network and the long time it took for the French authorities to finish these camps, and they were in many ways also connected to what we call a network of mines. So you have the building of these, the majority of these railroad systems were in many ways connected to mines like coal, cobalt, that Vichy authorities saw as part of the French economy, but then later on this is something that the Nazis thought about using for their own economy too. But that would come later on especially in 42. You start seeing documents of German officers in France as well as in North Africa talking about the use of some of these mines, the potential future use of some of these mines to support industries in Europe. These are a few other pictures you can see just from another thing I'm really interested in as far as these future projects, and because remember we're just at the beginning really of writing this history. Another is the notion of a lot of these internees talks about shoes, and you can really think about in terms of survivors as well as in terms of the people who died in this, what the meanings of shoes, the meanings of clothes in writing this history. And so internally, so a lot of this is one of the tents where people were housed. For instance, it has mostly between 3 to 5 people, sometimes up to 8. And the last thing I want to end up with here is how do we think about these camps today, and what is in terms of memory, because I think this is a story that we don't know a lot about, but it's also a story that it needs to be written. And as survivors that are dying, I think we have to find ways to not only collect the stories of survivors or descendants of the survivors, but also how to think about the spaces. So there are still, these are some of the buildings that are still now, that have survived since the end of the war. This is Camp Tendrara, which you have the picture of the flyers is part of it. And you have also, this is another camp of Ain al-Warraq. And still today, in the remaining part of the remaining railroad system in a camp called Bergent. And so these are, there is a project, there have been studies and study groups as part of human rights groups in Morocco and other parts of North Africa to make these camps, or at least sites, remaining sites of these camps, memorial sites. There are not a lot of memorial sites that are related to these camps, with the exception of one memorial site in Tunisia, which basically names the list of people who died in the Holocaust. But these sites are something that a lot of people are thinking about, not only researchers, but even NGOs and members of the civil society. And I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. I tried to make sure that to make it as general as possible. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Anything that needs to be more clarification. Thank you, and thanks for the invitation, Tali, and to the centers.
Thank you very much, Uma. It's, you know, when we speak about the Holocaust, we always speak about Europe. We do not think that in our own continent, there were camps. And when I quoted in the beginning the 43,000 sites, indeed many of them are in Africa. In West Africa, Niger, Senegal, Lac-Sabugitan, but also in North Africa. So thank you very much. There are a few questions. So while we continue with the program, I will appreciate, Uma, if you will be able to look at the questions and
I'm answering them right now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I would like to invite Jan Leideke, the Regional Director of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation Southern Africa, to give us concluding remarks for tonight's commemoration. His remarks will be followed by a musical reflection from Wandile Nzuza from the University of Pretoria, one of the fellows, the director of the fellows of the leadership of the Together We Remember coalition. Jan, the floor is yours.
Dear Holocaust survivors, dear family members, Ambassador Schäfer, Your Excellencies, dear guests, and most of all also dear Tali. Thank you for this opportunity to have the closing remarks. And you asked me, I wanted to thank everyone on behalf of all the organizations that collaborated today, everyone to make this possible, for the immense, I know how much work goes into it and how special it is the first time that this cannot be celebrated together at the Holocaust Center and its amazing space here in Johannesburg. And I think today is a testament of how much we miss it, but also how much is possible through the new technologies. I want to make two brief remarks. One is, which I hadn't planned as an historian, because the pandemic we're living in has popped up so often in words today. And I wanted to leave a little bit of a message of hope, but in so many aspects, people use the 1920s and 30s as an analogy of where we are today politically and see similarities. But let's remember one thing. The 1920s began with the Spanish flu, and they began with the first SARS-CoV pandemic. And as hard as it is today, we are doing better than then. And as hard as these measures is, as our fears and anxieties are overcoming, we see an amazing effort by people all around the world to overcome, to be solidaric, to be together, and to beat this virus. And that's different. The second thing, and that gives me hope, because we also didn't see a repetition of World War I or anything. This is, as much as we are struggling, a better century. And that is something that we've learned I think, from the horrors of the mid-20th century. Then again, as our ambassador rightly said, it's a challenging time because we see ghosts of the past coming back. And it hurts me today that we are, as members of the German community in South Africa, commemorating with you here at a time where we do have a far-right, very strong far-right party in German parliament with strong fascist tendencies and strong links to the neo-Nazis, and that they're even what in other countries would be official opposition. But I think also it is a bit of a testimony to the strength of the German democracy that they are now isolated. And it was deeply moving for me today to watch the ceremony in Parliament that is always held on January 27, and to hear Charlotte Knobloch speak, in her late 80s Holocaust survivor and the former chairperson of the German Council of Jews. And she said something that's very meaningful for me, not only calling herself a patriot of the Federal Republic, but also saying to the far right that she would not include them in her greetings, and that she said she and others were fighting a strong fight for a democratic future in commemoration. And they were also fighting a fight for their countries, but they lost their fight 76 years ago. And that fight is ongoing. Our fight for democracy, for remembrance is ongoing. And I think Ambassador Schäfer reiterated this commitment that all of us have. I'm very grateful that we were allowed as Rosa Luxemburg Foundation to sponsor this event and others with the Holocaust and Genocide Center. It's a little bit of a contribution that we as a German development aid community here can do. And I'm very grateful to see that so many hundreds of people today joined us from all around the world. And it's a testament to the work and the outreach and the quality of the work of the Holocaust Center and the significance that this day has for many of us, everyone here involved, and will continue to have in this century. And with this, thank you everyone for participating, for organizing, for Professor Boum for these amazing lessons. I learned a lot. And I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you for broadening our perspectives. And with this also for me, thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Wandile Nzuza from Johannesburg, South Africa, and this is my small contribution towards the Remembrance Day commemoration. I hope you enjoy the song. It's one of my all-time favorites, and it was sang in the same spirit of world peace and remembrance. Let's make never again a reality. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only
hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possession. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. And you may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight's commemoration. Thank you to the 3 centers in South Africa, to all the teams, to the speakers, Ambassador Schaefer, UN Director, Professor Boum, and to all of you. We will say goodnight listening to the song A Walk in Caesarea, or Eli Eli, written by Hannah Senesh in 1942. Hannah Senesh was a resistance fighter who was caught in Hungary and executed by the Nazis in Budapest in November 1944. The song is sang by Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center volunteer Nir Dishon, and I invite you all to read the chat while we just listen to this song. Good night to you all. We will see you again soon. Keep safe and well.
שלא ייגמר לעולם החול והים רשלו של המים דרק השמיים תפילת האדם החול והים רשלו של המים ורק השמיים תפילת האדם. אלי שלא ייגמר לעולם החול והים רשלו של המים דרק השמיים תפילת האדם תפילה